History books will give you a story. Money, on the other hand, tells you the truth. Today, we set aside the official account and look at how the Federal Reserve was really created. The year is 1910. A freezing November night. Hoboken train station, New Jersey. From here, a journey would begin. One that would quietly change the fate of the world. And yet, no one standing on that platform had any idea what was unfolding before them. A group of men arrived at the station in complete secrecy. These weren't ordinary travelers. They represented the dynasties that controlled the financial power of America, and perhaps the world. But that night, they were not permitted to use their real names. Senator Nelson Aldrich, the right hand of the Rockefeller family. Beside him, some of the sharpest financial minds Wall Street had ever produced. Their instructions were simple and absolute. Refer to one another only by first name. Last names were forbidden on this train, because if word had gotten out that this particular group was gathering in one place, Wall Street would have collapsed, markets would have panicked, and everything they were planning would have been finished before it even started. Their destination, a remote island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island. The official cover story was simple. A group of wealthy friends heading off on a duck hunt. But they weren't after ducks. They were after something far larger. A system that would put control of the American economy in their hands. At the time, America had no central bank. The public deeply distrusted bankers. The panic of 1907 had pushed the country to the edge of ruin, and ordinary people were frightened. Frightened of what might happen when too much financial power ended up in too few hands. That's exactly why this meeting could never have happened in Washington or New York. They needed somewhere quiet, remote, away from any watchful eye. The Jekyll Island Club. A retreat so exclusive that only the world's wealthiest could set foot inside, was the perfect cover. By the time they stepped off the train and onto the boat, every member of the island's staff had been quietly replaced. New workers, people who wouldn't recognize a face in the group, had been brought in. The level of secrecy was extraordinary, even by the standards of men like these. So who was in that room? Paul Warburg, widely regarded as the architect of the European banking system and his senior partner at Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Frank Vanderlip, president of the National City Bank, and Benjamin Strong, the man J.P. Morgan trusted most. The combined wealth represented at the table amounted to roughly 1/6 of all the money in the world. One in every $6 on Earth, controlled by the men in that room. For 9 days, they didn't leave. They argued, disagreed, revised, and argued again. Their aim wasn't simply to build a powerful institution. It was to build one that the public would never recognize as what it actually was. Something with all the powers of a central bank, but without the name. Paul Warburg was the intellectual center of the group. His position was firm. It must not be called a central bank. Let's call it the Federal Reserve System, he argued. Federal suggests government oversight. Reserve suggests stability. It was, in every sense, a masterpiece of naming. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The authority to create money would appear to belong to the government, but in practice, it would rest with private banks. Politicians would get the spending power they wanted. Bankers would keep their grip on interest rates and inflation. Everyone got something. Almost. The draft, known as the Aldrich Plan, was rejected by Congress on the first attempt. The fingerprints of Wall Street were simply too visible. But they didn't walk away. They changed their approach. The 1912 presidential election was drawing near. They put their weight behind Woodrow Wilson, a man who was promising voters he would stand up against the money trust. His advisors, however, were the very same men who had designed the secret plan on Jekyll Island. And then the moment came. Christmas 1913. Most members of Congress had already left Washington for the holidays. The chamber sat nearly empty. In that window, the Federal Reserve Act was quietly pushed to a vote. December 23, 1913. The moment President Wilson put his signature on that act, the plan written in secret on Jekyll Island became the law of the United States. Years later, Wilson is said to have reflected on it with deep regret, acknowledging that the nation's growth and all its activities had fallen into the hands of just a few men. What did this actually mean? Money was no longer a store of value tied to gold. It became a debt instrument. Every dollar printed came back to the government, and through it, to the people, as a liability. From that point on, inflation became a permanent feature of modern economic life. Since 1913, the US dollar has lost more than 96% of its purchasing power. The question worth sitting with is this: is that an accident, or is it the system working exactly as intended? That meeting on Jekyll Island gave birth to what you might call the invisible hand of the modern economy. The hand that sets interest rates, that decides how much money flows and how much doesn't, that steers crises, and sometimes perhaps starts them. Today, the Federal Reserve Building in Washington looks every bit the part of a government institution. But technically, it is an independent entity. Its shares are held by private banks. It makes its own decisions. The word federal, just as Warburg intended back in 1910, is a carefully crafted illusion. Those men on that November train didn't merely found a bank. They changed what money itself means. By building a system grounded in debt, they set in motion something with no natural end. A cycle of growth that always, by design, requires more borrowing. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented chapter of financial history. Years after the fact, Frank Vanderlip gave an interview to the Saturday Evening Post and confirmed it himself. That yes, he had been part of that secret expedition to Jekyll Island. The Jekyll Island Club still stands today. The room where those men sat is quiet now, but the decisions made there are anything but. You can hear them in your grocery bill, in your mortgage payment, in the paycheck that never quite stretches as far as it should. Economic cycles, financial crises, market bubbles, the roots of all of them trace back to that so-called duck hunt. You cannot play a game well without understanding its rules. And this particular game has been running, largely unseen, for over a century. Perhaps the real question is this: who truly owns the money in your pocket? You earned it? Yes. But the mechanism that determines what it's worth, and can quietly diminish that worth whenever it chooses, that was never yours to control. The story of Jekyll Island doesn't belong only to the past. It is a blueprint that still shapes our present, and will shape what comes next. At a moment when digital currencies and new financial systems are reshaping money again, understanding what happened in 1910 has never mattered more. Nelson Aldrich, Paul Warburg, J.P. Morgan. The names change with the decades. The faces change, but the underlying logic of the system, that core desire to maintain control, has not moved an inch since that cold November night. Financial freedom begins with understanding. In this documentary, we have looked behind the curtain. What lies there is not comfortable to see, but sometimes the act of simply seeing clearly is where real change begins. What would the world look like today if that meeting had never taken place? We'll never know. But we do know this: the ink on the signature Wilson placed that December night has never truly dried. Thank you for taking this journey with us, for being willing to look at the pages of history that don't usually make it into textbooks. If you want to go deeper, to understand money, power, and who really controls both, keep asking questions. In our next episode, we will open another one of history's locked doors. Until then, never stop questioning. Goodbye. The train is departing, gentlemen. Hurry up.